Hi and welcome to the Sunday Lunch Project Manager podcast for Sunday, 17th of April 2022. This is your host, Nigel Creaser. And this week we have Peter Cappelli, the Professor of Management guy. But first, a little bit of a word from sponsors. This week is a bit of a mishmash on sponsorship. As ever, we continue to be supported by Tamplo. Thank you, Tamplo. Tamplo is the solution that connects your meetings to your action plans. It's an intuitive collaboration platform that combines meeting monitoring, task management, and dynamic dashboards. It gains transparency, performance, and efficiency. So if you want to improve the way you run meetings, the way you manage tasks, and some of your project management activities, go along to tinyurl.com/Nigel Creaser Tamplo. That's tiny URL, and it's Nigel, Nigel, Creaser Tamplo. And that's the first one. The second one is one of my kind of personal sponsors. I'm very fortunate to do some international judo that I compete in at a master's level, and I have a few organisations that support me through doing that. And whilst it's not 100% relevant to you guys, there may be some of you out there who are interested in sports performance, etc. So the first one I've got is Talk. I'm a Talk ambassador, and Talk are a range of sports performance nutrition. In my opinion, the very nicest. I first got introduced to them by their apple crumble gel, which normally most of those gels made me feel sick and horrible. This one didn't, and surprised the heck out of me about tasting like apple crumble, like it said on the tin. Even the taste after you've had the sweet apple at the back of it, you could taste the pastry, which is fantastic. They have a massive range. Go along to talkfitness.co.uk and grab some of that. I know all around the world at the moment, they're a local company to me, literally 2 miles away. So yeah, get on that. The other one is Scimitar Sportswear, who have been supporting me for the last six months or so, and they do a range of running gear, cycling gear, varying different types, and they have another sort of sister brand called Funky Sportswear, which do a lot of cycling stuff, a lot of for women, for running and cycling, and men as well. The men's tops, I've got a couple of those which have a couple of Mr. Men characters on, and the Angry Birds characters, which I think for me is fantastic. They also have some custom work where they can do sports clubs, so pop along to them, which is Scimitar Sportswear shop. I'll put the link in the thing, and more importantly on that one, any of the Scimitar stuff, if you use the code NIGELC20, that's Nigel C and the number 20, you can get 20% discount on certain ranges that aren't currently discounted or under a special deal. So that's it for all of my sponsorship, and on with the news. So I'm recording this just before our break for Easter. We have we're off on holiday, so I'm recording this about a week early compared to normal, rather than I normally do it just a couple of days before the release date. But actually, it's been quite a busy week this last week. I have ended up arranging a workshop, with my team, and we met in the big city, London. I live out in the middle of nowhere in the UK. But yeah, we had a bunch of us, a team of 9 of us who had not met before. We'd been talking to each other on video. In fact, one of the team generally I'd never seen him put his video on, so I'd never seen him in his face, and it was great to get back into that space with people, and wonderful feeling at the end of it, where I walked out the office. I was going to do something, came back to the meeting room where we were all doing the workshop, and as I was approaching the door, a little way away, all I could hear was laughter and people getting to know each other and communicating. So it was great to be back in. I hope any of you who are doing that now are seeing the benefits, and I do think the benefits, we were looking at certain things and picking out topics and prioritization of things, and it was so much easier in the room, one, to get people engaged, but also identify the passion about a certain topic or thing that's causing people problems that I just couldn't pick up when we talked about similar things over the video calls. Now, I think you've all heard me say I'm not an advocate that we should all be back in the offices, but I think it is very important to think about, right, what am I doing? What are we doing? What is our objective? And let's use the right tool. Now, that right tool might be a video call, that right tool might be a phone call, that right tool might be a text, an email, or that right tool might be everyone sat around a whiteboard. And I think it is something now that it's a little bit more thinking and planning about these meetings, these communications, whereas typically it wouldn't have to think about it. We had all of those choices very quickly, very easily to us when we were in an office. If we wanted to grab everyone and get them in a room, booking a meeting room notwithstanding, you grab the right people you want, go and take them to the board. If you've got facilities where you have whiteboards right by your desk, you could do all that at the drop of a hat. And nowadays we have to think about it a bit more. Sometimes it won't be perfect, but I think it is really useful that we've got all those tools and we can use them how we want to use them. So that really is the highlight of my week. Meeting the team was fantastic. Getting the interaction from them was fantastic, and a bit of business travel, which I haven't done for a little while because of the pandemic, obviously, and a little bit before that I was only local travel. It's quite exciting. And I suppose a little shout out to the hotel we stayed in, which was the NYX. I can't remember what it's called, so I think it might just be NYX Hotel in near Holborn in London, which was not your normal run-of-the-mill corporate hotel in a city. It was quite fun, funky, and entertaining. Although when we got there, the offer of a free tequila when we were checking in was, I'm not sure if that was a good or bad thing, but I only had one, so it was alright and nothing went crazy. But yeah, that was good. If stuff's good. Lunchtime we went for a long walk and we ended up at a street market, a street food market that one of our team had got, which I had a delicious wrap there. And again, doing that together, just kind of things we're not doing, and being in the office thinking, oh, sitting in the office, don't get to move. Well, my 10,000 steps were done well before the end of the day. So yeah, it's great. So I urge you to think about, do I go into an office? Can I go in? But again, don't just go there and sit on the phone. Do only the things that you can do face to face with someone. That's my view. If I can do something face to face, I can do it without being face to face, and it's effective enough, then I won't do it. But where the effectiveness needs to be heightened, it's really good. Everything else, kind of books and stuff and all that kind of thing. Working on my presentation, ready for at the end of May, which was quite exciting, seeing my face now on the pmconference.gr website. Biog about me, although I sent him a typo in the biog. There you go. It's quite very exciting and a bit nerve-wracking, so I need to get that sorted. Anyway, I'll leave you now and let you get on to listen to Mr. Peter Cappelli, and I'll come back later. I'll record on this computer. Yeah, you think they should have just a big red button That's all what I always look for, but it's always under a menu. Is it telling you it's recording now?
Yes.
Brilliant. Just a sip of non-alcoholic beer here. Today, I want to welcome to the show Peter Cappelli, who is the George W. Taylor Professor of Management at the Wharton School and Director of the Wharton Center for Human Resources. He is also Research Associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and since 2007 is a Distinguished Scholar at the Ministry of Manpower for Singapore. Peter's recent research examines changes in employment relations in the United States and their implications, and writes a monthly column on workforce issues for the Human Resources Executive Online. And he has a book out called The Future of the Office, Work from Home, Remote Work, and the Hard Choices We Face. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Thank you. My pleasure.
It's great to have you on. So, giving you that little bit of intro there, do you want to just fill out a bit more about you? Where are you? What family, and kind of a little bit of background?
Okay, sure. So I've been in Philadelphia at the Wharton School for 36 years, something like that, and briefly at the University of Illinois before that, and briefly at MIT before that. And before that, I did my doctorate at Oxford,
Right.
sort of in economics of labor. I studied inflation and incomes policies, which I never thought we'd ever hear of again, but here we are dealing with inflation.
Yeah.
So I guess if you stay around long enough, it comes back.
Everything
comes
becomes
around.
trendy again, doesn't it?
Yeah, yes, it does. I guess I've been interested in things that have a policy implication. So I got interested in management as maybe because I'm at the Wharton School, I had to teach this stuff, but we were doing policy research. A colleague and I ran a research center for the Department of Education in the US for quite a while. And it became pretty clear that if you're worried about what happens to employment and skills and all those things, the place you want to look is the decisions that employers make. So who do you hire? What are you looking for? Do you train people? How do you design the work? Do you try to make it interesting for people, or do you try to de-skill it and make it as simple as possible? And so those are the issues that I think have always interested me. So this topic of the future of work, of course, is different than a lot of these topics because, frankly, most of the things that we hear about when we talk about the future of work are things that maybe kind of could be at some point, like, will robots take all our jobs?
The paperless office.
Yeah, right. So, most of those things just never turn out to be true, but every year or two, there's, some story about these things. And I think we know for most of them that they're probably not ever going to be true, but nevertheless, the media likes something that sounds exciting. Yeah. And let me tell you, you don't get any attention saying, nah, don't worry about it. It's probably going to be nothing, right? Never gets true. Media true. Play. So this issue about the office, though, is, at least in my lifetime, the biggest issue that we can say for sure we have to deal with. And the reason, of course, is that, we just went through going up on 2 years now of a forced experiment. In the US, 70+% of people whose work could be done remotely were working remotely at some point. A third of the US workforce at some point. In Europe, it was higher. It was about 43% or so, and around the world, everybody was experiencing this. And I think the general conclusion is for office work, it worked far better than anybody thought it was going to. And so now we have this obvious question, okay, what are you going to do next? Yeah. Since a lot of employers say, okay, that was fun, let's go back to the office. But then you have the employees who say, many of them, well, if it works so well, why are we going back to the office? What's the point of that, right? So the reason this is such a big deal is employers have to choose, right? Yeah. So doing nothing is a choice. That's pretty clear in this case. And, there are implications to all these choices, and some of them could be quite big. And the reason I wrote this book was because I was kind of being asked these questions all the time, about what should we do? What do we know? And it turns out we knew more than we thought, because some of these things we've been looking at for a while in other contexts.
Yeah, that's good. So the things that struck me, and some of the things you said there echoed in my mind there, was as an employee last year when we were talking, I think it must have been last year, probably towards the latter end of the summer, when we're talking about what's going to happen. Are we going to open offices? Are we going to go back? And my company was saying that at the time they weren't going to. And I really thought myself, I thought, actually, I had, at the time, I had a team in, and for people who don't know where these are, I'll try and explain. I'm up in North Shropshire, which is just on the Welsh border. I had people in Liverpool, which is about 40-50 miles away. People down in Worthing on the south coast of the UK, 100-150 miles away, and further away, some people around the centre of the UK. And I was kind of sitting there going, well, I've just spent 6 months, 9 months managing a team like this. If we start saying, right, thou shalt go into the office, and my firm never made that kind of thing, wouldn't do that, it's a good firm. But if in that situation, say you've got to go into the office, it's kind of, well, I go in the office and I'd pick up a phone and talk to the same people, or I'd use Teams. But I've driven 40 miles, 40 minutes, and I'm going to have to drive 40 minutes back later. Actually makes no sense, especially to be in that sort of manner. And one of the things I've talked about is around, and plug my book as well as your book at the same time. I did a little bit in a book I'd done about productivity and about remote working, was something I couldn't not talk about. And one of the things I said about there is that whilst we're doing the remote working, actually face-to-face is still something that has incredibly high value, in my opinion. And you can't build a relationship as strong remotely as you can face-to-face. You can still build very strong relationships, but not, I don't think, as strong or as quickly maybe. And I kind of said, well, if we're going to go into an office, do what you can only do in an office. When you are face to face with an individual with a whiteboard or a cup of coffee across from you, you can only do those kind of things sometimes face to face. But don't go there and sit next to someone and never talk to anyone else, and never do those, only because you're just wasting that resource, isn't it? It's if you can make a phone call, do it from home. Now, there's some other health benefits of being around other people generically, but I think the thing is about focusing on what. The way I talk about it is about choosing what to do. It's like when you have a dress down policy in an organization, where if you're meeting a very important client, or you're in a very important meeting or whatever, or you're doing presentations, you may put on a shirt and tie. If you're sitting there with your normal team, you're in jeans and a t-shirt. Same with the work location. From what I've talked about, is kind of, do we just change to work where you need to be and trust the people to make the right choices?
Yeah, and so the reason it's such an interesting question, particularly for, I guess, many of your audience, is when we come to something like project work. Right? Yeah. So, we've been thinking about remote work without articulating the assumptions often, but we're most of the time thinking about individual contributors. Mm-hmm. And the people who want to go move to Switzerland and stay in the mountains and things. Yeah. They're largely individual contributor roles. That works pretty well for those people. We know a fair bit about that because we've been studying that kind of stuff for a while. We also just assume that the reason people want to work remotely is because they don't want to commute. That's not always true, right? There are a lot of people who don't have long commutes. At least my commute used to be, I could just walk, and it wasn't a bad thing. But here's something quirky, at least in the US anyway, and that is that whatever you do, like building new public transport or build new roads or things that would reduce people's commute time, what happens is they just move further out. Yeah. So let's make it easier for people to not commute. They're going to just move further away. They're going to say, well, I only have to be in twice a week now, so now I can live even further out, right? Yeah. So some of this is just kind of never ending. But I think
is that driven by, like, over from you'll know all this history and stuff of and when we all started moving into conurbations and into larger populous areas to work rather than being remote. Is that something that drives that? Is the fact that actually that it isn't natural for us to live in those large, huge communities, because those communities, you get lost within them. Whereas if you're
Yeah.
living in a small village community where it used to be you'd know pretty much everyone in the community, do you think it's something to do with that? And it kind of gives you that stronger sense of community rather than being that small cog in a big city wheel.
Yeah, I think, at least to the extent to which this is a US story, it is a post-World War II story.
Mm-hmm.
And some of it had to do with the growing affluence and the new generation of people who suddenly, after the war, started having kids and wanted to get away from their parents.
Yeah.
And particularly this was driven by the in-laws, right?
Yeah.
Didn't want to live with their mother-in-law, sort of thing. And it is a good question, though, right? Because we also have this move back into the cities, which has been going on as the cities got nicer. When we moved to Philadelphia 36 years or so ago, we moved far out to Valley Forge. It was 26 miles. It was farm country out there. Yeah. And then we moved back into the city. There's this priest, rabbi, minister joke. The whole planet is sick of these, but this joke is about the meaning of life. And the priest says, well, it's clearly at conception. And the minister says, no, it's birth. And the rabbi says, it's when the kids leave home and the dog dies. And our kids left home and the dog died. So we moved back into the city, right? So I think it is a good question. One of the things that worries people here was about the economy and commercial real estate, if we really go in a big way toward working from home, is what will happen to office space. I don't think there's a big problem for the cities, to be honest, because a lot of people want to be in the cities, particularly if you have a nicer city, they want to live there, And I just can't believe these people who, like particularly in Silicon Valley and San Francisco, who say, well, if we could just let people, they'd all move out to someplace cheaper. No, they won't. There's a reason people in San Francisco don't want to go live in the middle of Iowa. I'm sure it's charming in the middle of Iowa, but, they like the things about cities, So I think we are a little bimodal on this now. There are people, particularly with kids, who would like to have big property, big houses, all that sort of stuff. And then there are people who are not with kids, but also people who are attached to urban lifestyles who really want to be in the cities. I think the places that are in trouble if we work from home are these places that we call sort of edge cities. And I don't know what the UK equivalent was. It would have been Milton Keynes years ago. I don't know what it is now, but around here, it's Tyson's Corners outside of Washington and King of Prussia outside Philadelphia. They're office parks, basically.
Yeah.
And those are the places that are in trouble because nobody wants to live there. The only reason they were ever there was because the jobs were there.
Yeah.
But if the jobs aren't there, nobody wants to live near those places. They'll be either in the cities or they'll live further out in the country,
The purpose-built new towns sort of thing.
Yeah. So we had a conference here with the Federal Reserve looking into some of these questions, and the situation so far anyway has been surprisingly okay for cities and commercial real estate. It's not tanking. The commercial companies are not in big trouble. The tenants haven't asked for big cuts. There are not that many moving out and things. And one of the quirkiest things, right, in the US is that the companies that have led the charge to let's allow you to work remotely were the tech companies in Silicon Valley, the Apples and the Googles and all those folks. They're also the companies that have led the snapping up of commercial real estate in places like New York City. So at the same time they're telling their employees, go work remotely, they're buying up office space all over the place.
Yeah.
So what's going on there? I don't know. They're not saying.
Well, I guess the whole thing is with those guys is if it's about I guess the double thing, like I say, I read in the beginning of your book, and I know it's saying today, I watched is it the internship with oh, I've forgotten both their names now. The two comedy shows about Google, when they're being Googlers,
Oh,
and
yeah,
they're
yeah.
like when they're
Yeah.
in their late 30s, late 40s, or whatever, trying to get back into
Yeah,
it.
cool.
And
Yeah.
I can't remember the names. It's frustrating me now. I'll remember them about halfway through the thing anyway.
Yeah, I don't
But
remember. I know the movie. I don't remember him either. So
yeah. So and I find it entertaining, and that whole thing of the bringing everyone into the, like you talk about it, about what they offered there, and the helter skelter slide, trying to basically bring people in from off the campus, and kind of transition into from being a student campus lifestyle into work campus lifestyle, with all the sort of
yeah,
things and all the benefits doing that. And you
yeah,
wonder whether, and again, the same, I suppose you've got to look at an organization for that, and you're looking at, all right, I want the best talent. And all that talent, some people love that idea of staying as a student and being there. Some of them
yeah,
want to be sitting, as you say, up on a mountain in Switzerland.
yeah.
Others want to be in the hub of urban, do you know what I mean, the center of New
Mhm.
York. So
Yeah, yeah,
offering all of those ability, and actually that, depending on their life over time, I
yeah,
suspect they will want something different, or
yeah,
even during a year, they'll want something. Oh, I'll go and work in New York for six
yeah,
months in
yeah.
the summer, winter, whichever is their
Hmm.
want to, and then maybe they want to go and work in Boulder, Colorado, or they want to.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
If they can have those multi and just have the facilities they need,
yeah,
and either they can remote, they can office, and they
yeah,
can go to any buildings, then that
yeah.
starts to make sense why they would do that sort of thing.
Yeah, it does take us back to this individual contributor role things. I want
Yeah.
to make sure we get this in for your listeners in particular. You know, the most of us are not individual contributors,
Hmm.
and if you are working on projects, and most of the work of organizations now is really project
Yeah.
based, right? And particularly if you're trying to use, more sophisticated, agile like project management systems, the complication is they don't seem to work well remotely, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of face to face really seems important. And the problem is, and all your colleagues know, is that you don't know when face to face is going to really be important. You're working on something, and hey, something came up right now. And it's not like, let's schedule a meeting in a week and we can, and I think then we'll have something to talk about. No, we've got something to talk about right now, right?
Yeah. I can
And the
see
problem
that.
of not being in the office is that to connect people, it's still kind of clunky to have a meeting by Zoom.
Yeah.
It is clunkier to have a meeting with half the people in Zoom and half the people not in Zoom.
Yeah.
My experience with this recently is it's still the case the people on Zoom get kind of ignored
Yes.
by the people in the room, right? And so, how do you manage projects? Individual contributors, not such a problem. But how do you manage projects if some of the people are remote? It happens a lot, right? Because we have consultants often who are now engaged in projects, but they're kind of ancillary to the projects for the most part. They're usually not the core group. So, how are we going to manage projects if people are remote, even if we have these hybrid models, right? Which mean sometimes in the office, sometimes not. So the day something really important comes up, we really want to talk about it, half the people are on their work from home day, right?
Yeah.
And the problem is, if you ring them up and say, we really want to have a meeting on this, the reason they're at home, frankly, is because they want to have control over their time.
Yeah.
And they don't want to have to be sitting at their desk for 8 hours, just waiting for you to call them and say, hey, something's up, right? So then you're trying to schedule a meeting with people who have got other things to do, and it just doesn't work very well, right? So that's the problem from the employer's side, right? It's wonderful to talk about all this from the employee's side.
Yeah.
I get to work where I want, I get to work when I want. That's great. The employer is asking, how does this help us? And the answer so far is it's just not very clear, right?
Yeah. And I think the how do we collaborate? And I had a conversation. One of a friend of mine on interviewed me on his podcast, and they have a marketing organization that they have in local to me, and he's very firm that he thinks yes, fair enough, hybrid working is going to happen, but he thinks it's rubbish. It's not as good. And they're a marketing organization. They're a very collaborative team. They've got a team where they're knocking ideas together and they're building great. And I think the thing is you've always got that team building element of it, that ability to go, as we said before, about how do we make sure that we keep the collaborative and the personal side of deliveries, and how do we not? And I know that but I also think that we were in a lot, certainly in the information industry, in the IT industry, there was a lot of this happening anyway, with lots of offshore, like what I'm trying to think, it must be 20 years ago when I was working at Oracle, they had a thing where it's right, 25% of all bids needed to be offshore, using the offshore team in India. And that was a case of what we're doing. There were some projects I delivered where we had a chunk of the team in India. And what we ended up having to do was to bring, because we got confusion between the teams. People didn't understand what people were talking about. We had, and I say time difference, all those sort of problems has exacerbated that. If you're in the same time zone, it's okay. It's hard enough, but when you're in a different time zone, it makes it even harder. And we ended up flying the guys over, three of the guys over, two or three, and they were sort of like the lead business analysts and one of the engineers, and they worked with our team over here. We were working directly with the client at the time, and they built relationships, they built understanding, they were able to draw a point, show together and this is before we had Zoom and decent tools like we've got now, where you can do decent sharing as well. So it was even harder then. And that made a massive difference when they went back, because they understood our team. They had a relationship with our team, and they knew their team, and they became that interface between that team. And it much improved the quality of what we're doing, and reduced communication barriers and team barriers and things like that. And I think
go ahead, sorry.
No, you carry on.
I was going to say that, early this effort at having remote work with contractors was really kind of a cost play, right? Yeah. It wasn't that we really thought that it was better to have somebody phoning in from the Middle East or China or India. Yeah. It was just a lot cheaper. And, one of the problems is we don't know whether it was really cost effective. It was just cheaper up front, right? And this is an accounting problem. So I'm finishing another book on that problem. Why is it that we seem to manage everything so poorly with respect to people? And a lot of it has to do with this issue of financial accounting, where we really don't know whether this is better to do this, but we know that it's cheaper up front, so that's what we do, right? Yeah,
and sometimes you pay now or you pay later with certain things, don't you?
Oh, that is absolutely.
And when you pay later, you don't necessarily know you're paying, do you?
Right, because it's not in the accounting category in quite the same way, like turnover costs of employees. There's no bucket in financial accounting where you'll see anything about that, right? The other thing I wanted to say, Nigel, just on this things we know, is that we've studied this kind of remote work that you're describing, because as you say, it's been going on for a while, particularly since the .com period. There's been a lot of people who have worked as consultants or just remotely outside salespeople, for example, and you may remember around that time, turn of the last century, IBM pushed.
Say that, it makes me feel old.
I know, yeah, right. IBM pushed 40% of its employees out the door, right? And the IBM joke then became IBM stood for I'm by myself, right? Yeah. Because they took away your offices, and that was cheaper. We're going to save money and all that stuff. And one of the things they realized is that if you're going to do this agile project management stuff, that you got to bring the people back in. But the other thing that we realize, and this is important, really important for everybody thinking about this to understand, is that remote work after the pandemic will not look like remote work during the pandemic. Because during the pandemic, we had no choice. Everybody was doing it. Your boss was remote. I was remote. Everybody was remote. We also were pulling together to try to keep things afloat. And there was a lot of camaraderie and all that kind of stuff. After the pandemic, when we're asking you to raise your hand and choose whether you want to work remotely or not, it's a very different exercise when some people are in the office and you are remote. And what we know about that, which we studied for about 20 years, is almost every measure of career outcomes for the remote people are worse. Their engagement is worse, their commitment is worse, their rate of promotion is less, their pay increases are less. They tend to get cut off from the communication. They're not as part of the organization. They don't feel the culture in the same way. You know, it's one thing if everybody's remote. It's another if you are the remote person and everybody else is in the office. You know, we remember how during conference calls, you know, you had to be in China, so you're calling in for the conference call and everybody ignores you.
Yeah.
You know, you could have been off the phone for a while. The line went dead. Nobody knows, right? And it's important to remember that if you're going to be the remote worker, your career will pay a price for that, right? Now, people don't want to hear that, but there's been a bunch of studies of this. They all show the same thing. And ask yourself this mental exercise. Say, suppose I have an identical twin in my office. We're doing the same job, the same way. We're both equally good at it. But your twin is going to go back to the office and you're going to move to Himalaya and be a remote employee. Which one of you is going to get ahead? Well, I mean, we know. And what were you going to have to do to fix that? Well, there's nothing I can think of the way organizations work now, because it's so much about access to information, opportunities to shine, you know, to grab the interesting projects early on, to know what's going on so you can adjust to the whims in the organization. We don't know how to fix that.
Hello, hope you enjoyed that first part of the conversation with Peter. Next part will be out in a couple of weeks. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks very much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, it would be brilliant if you would like to support it. Number of ways you can do that. Number one is sharing it with your friends and colleagues. The more people who hear about it, the more people get to get the experience from my fantastic guests. If you want to go a bit more than that, you could jump onto wherever you listen to this and give me a review. 5 stars would be lovely. And if you want to look at throwing some cash towards me, there are a number of ways you can do that. You can pop along to the Patreon/SundayLunchPM there, or you could grab one of the books that I've published over the years and obviously get a little bit of cash from those. On the website, under the shop, under the shop, I've got links to all of my previous guests' books, and Andy and Joel's is on there. And if you jump along to there, you can buy a copy of their books, and I get a little kickback from that too. And obviously, with our new headline sponsor of Templo, popping along, signing up, and if you end up using it, I will get a kickback there as well. So finally, obviously, as I say every time, the most important thing though is come back next time. I'll speak to you soon. Cheers.
Remember, if you want better meetings and better task follow-up, Templo's where to get it. Don't forget your 1-month trial. tinyurl.com/Nigel Creaser Templo. That's NIGELCREASER Templo.
Well, it's goodbye from me, Nigel Creaser, and it's goodbye from him, the Sunday Lunch PM. Goodbye.